Good. We are live. Second stream of the day. Woo. What is going on with the world? If you missed it, earlier today I did my standard CTO office hours where we talked about one-on-ones and how to do them right, how to freaking be an awesome boss and help your team get better, however they want to get better. So yeah, that was earlier today. Tune in every Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern, to see that. Always a good topic, always live Q&A. So whatever problems you've got, bring them to the table. We'll help you out. So that was earlier today. Today, we are back in the saddle, writing some code on Road Trip Ninja. So that's our plan. I gotta mute some things over here. Okay, we got all the things muted. All right, good. So do a couple features. I did some backlog management earlier today to get a few things in line. There's a couple features we want to add to make it better for our users. And there's like one last thing that we want to add that I think will make it actually usable. And then we're going to launch the thing, try and build a landing page and all that fun stuff. But before that, yesterday, I stumbled onto this video where there is a new AI research. There is new research done by Stanford on productivity with AI, and it's way better than the previous one. So last week I talked about a survey that came out that said engineers thought they were 20% more efficient when in reality they were 19% less efficient. That was only done on 16 people. As you'll see as we walk through this one, they covered a lot more, and it gives you some pretty interesting info around what they've found, what works, when it makes sense, when you should use AI and when you shouldn't. So it's actually, I think it's pretty darn good. I'm pretty happy with it. So I want to just watch it here with everybody on stream. Let me get everything lined up nice and pretty, and we will go.
In January of this year, Mark Zuckerberg said that he was going to replace all of the mid-level engineers at Meta with AI by the end of the year. I think Mark was a bit optimistic, and he was probably acting like a good CEO would to inspire vision and also probably to keep the Facebook stock price up. But what Mark also did was create a lot of trouble for CTOs worldwide. Why? Because after Mark said that, every single CEO in the world almost turned to their CTO and said, hey, Marcus says he's going to replace all of his developers with AI. Where are we in that journey? And the answer probably was honestly not very far. And
I can confirm, as a CTO, that did happen. And that has happened multiple times for me, as since I run a fractional CTO business, I get a ton of people reaching out asking me this exact question. What should we do? How should we be doing this? And why aren't we doing it? There's a lot that goes into that, but this is some good information for those of you that are in this situation, whether you're the CTO, the VP, you're just an engineer, and someone's like, hey, what are we doing with AI? This will give you some backing. This will help you build a framework around what you should do, where it makes sense, when it makes sense, and when it doesn't make sense.
And we're not sure we're going to do that. And so I personally think, hopefully this is not, gonna change, but I don't think AI is going to replace developers entirely, at least this year, let alone at Meta, right? But and I do think that AI increases developer productivity, but there's also cases in which it decreases developer productivity. So AI, or using AI for coding, is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and there are cases in which it shouldn't be used. And so,
all right, so that sets the stage, and there's some really good data that is backed up within this whole story that he walks us through. But that's the reality. There never has been a silver bullet for anything, be it you want an agile framework or you want a technology, or you want anything. There is no one size fits all, and AI is exactly the same way. There's times where it's great. There's times where it's not. You have to engage your brain and figure out if you're in one of the situations where it makes sense to use it. And then if it does make sense to use it, you have to engage your brain again and decide how you're going to use it. So there's a couple places where you can't just be lazy and say, we're going to go AI. You have to be intentional and thoughtful about it. This video will walk you through a little bit of the things that help you figure that out.
So for the past 3 years, we've been running one of the largest studies on software engineering productivity at Stanford. And we've done this in a time series and cross-sectional way. So time series meaning that even if a participant joins in 2025, we get access to their Git history, meaning we can see trends of data across time. We can see COVID, we can see AI, we can see all of these trends and things that happened. And then also cross-sectional, because we have more than 600 companies participating, enterprise, mid-sized, and also startups. And so this means that we have more than 100,000 software engineers in our data set right now, dozens of millions of commits, and billions of lines of code. And most importantly, most of this data is private repositories. This is
All right, so already this is massively more valid than the 16 developer one that came out last week, where if you follow my TikTok or anything, I mentioned that, I talked through that. But this one, hundreds of thousands of engineers, 600 plus companies, that's real valid data.
This is important because if you use a public repo to measure someone's productivity, that public repo is not self-contained. Someone could be working on that repo on the weekend or once in a while, right? Whereas if you have a private repo, it's much more self-contained and much easier to measure the productivity of a team, of a company, of an organization. So late last year, there was a huge controversial thing around ghost engineers. So this came from kind of the same research group, our research group. And here, Elon Musk was kind enough to retweet us. But what we found is that roughly 10% of software engineers in our data set at the time, about 50,000, were what we called ghost engineers. These people.
Okay. Does that number surprise you? Does the concept that 10% of the engineers that they tracked effectively created zero value? Does that surprise you or not? If it doesn't surprise you, then what that likely means is that your team needs to do a better job of what I call either leveling up or leveling out. So if you have some folks that aren't able to level up and stay with you and grow and make a difference, then they've got to be leveled out. You have to do the hard work of realizing that they're not helping. So you need to do the hard work of removing them from the team and finding somebody that does move the needle. Unfortunately, there are too many places that just continue to let this happen. So hopefully you aren't one of those companies. If you are one of those companies and you need help, let me know. I help with that quite often. It's a common problem. I don't enjoy it, but it's a thing that once it's fixed at the end, everybody feels a little bit better because like, oh man, we got the team we need. So hopefully you're not in this situation, but if you are, reach out, let me know, and we'll see how we can help.
People collect a paycheck, but basically do no work. So that was very surprising for some people, very unsurprising for others. And so some of the people in this research team are, for example, Simon from industry. So he was CTO at a unicorn, which he exited. And he had a team of about 700 developers. And as CTO, he was always the last person to know when something was up with his engineering team, right? And so he thought, okay, how can I change this? Myself, I've been at Stanford since 22, and I focus on what I call data-driven decision-making in software engineering. And in a past life, I was looking after digital transformation for a large company with thousands of engineers. Part of the team is also Professor Kaczynski, who is at Stanford, And his research focuses on human behavior in a digital environment. And basically, he was the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower back in the day, if you recall that. So today, we're going to be talking about three things. We're going to start off with the limitations of existing studies that seek to quantify the impact of AI on developer productivity. We're going to showcase our methodology. And lastly, we're going to spend most of the time looking at some of the results. What is the impact on AI on dev productivity, and how are ways we can slice and dice these results to make them more meaningful? And so there's lots of research being done on this topic, but a lot of it is led by vendors who themselves are trying to sell you their own AI coding tools, right? And so there's a bit of a conflict of interest there sometimes. And the biggest three limitations that I see is that a lot of these studies revolve around commits and PRs and tasks. Hey, we completed more commits, more PRs.
This next section is fantastic. It's how I knew that, okay, this study actually is valid. They actually spent time understanding what metrics matter. As he's going to talk about is the PR tools, the code review tools that are out there. They are trying to say, hey, the more you do a thing, the better you are. That's not always the truth. And he's going to talk through that here. So again, this is one of those things that as I watch this, I'm like, this is the kind of study that we need. This has some real valid data in it. So, okay, back at it.
The time between commits decreased. The problem here is that task size varies, right? And so delivering more commits does not necessarily mean more productivity. And in fact, what we found very often is that by using AI, you're introducing new tasks that are bug fixes to the stuff that the AI just coded before. So by that case, like you're kind of spinning your wheels in place, right? So that's kind of funny. Secondly, there's a bunch of studies who say, well, we grabbed a bunch of developers, we split them into two groups, and we kind of gave one AI, and one of them we didn't. And what usually happens there is that these are kind of greenfield tasks where they're asked to build something with kind of zero context from scratch. And there, of course, AI decimates the non-AI people. But that's because AI is just really good at greenfield kind of boilerplate code, right? But actually, most of software engineering isn't greenfield and isn't always boilerplate, right? And so there's usually an existing code base, there's usually dependencies. So these studies can be like applied too well to these situations either.
Okay, so there's two key points there I want to talk about. Number one, more commits doesn't mean more better. They actually talked about some of the data that they'll show later shows that using AI causes you to commit more often, and actually some of those commits are cleanup from the work that AI got slightly wrong that you find later. So yes, there's more commits. Yes, they happen in fewer time frames, but it's not always value added code. Second, I can speak to this, you know, I'm with the app that I'm building right now. It is 100% true that AI can quickly spin up the boilerplate common things that are needed for you to get the party started. But once your product starts to get to a volume where there's enough complexity, that's where the context windows start to break down. And there's some more data later in this that we'll watch and listen that he really starts to explain that. So more to come.
And then we also have surveys, which we found to be an ineffective predictor of productivity by doing this small experiment with 43 developers, whereby we ask every developer.
This is one of my favorite parts because I've been posting 4 TikToks, Instagram, YouTube shorts a day, talking about what I've learned while doing AI across the board. And the number of people that jump in the comments and say like, you don't know what you're doing, bro. I'm like 20 and 30X. Well, let's watch and listen.
To evaluate themselves relative to the global mean or median in 5 percentile buckets from 0 to 100. And then we compared that to their measured productivity. We'll get into what that means later. But what we found is that asking someone how productive they think they are is almost as good as flipping a coin. There's very little correlation, right? And so we found that people misjudged their productivity by about 30 percentile points. Only 1 in 3 people actually estimated their productivity within their quartile, one quartile. And I think surveys are great. They're valuable for surfacing, morale and other issues that cannot be derived from metrics. But surveys shouldn't be used to measure developer productivity, much less the impact of AI on developers.
So for those of you out there that are on the no estimates bandwagon, this should fit clearly into that stance. I like estimates. I think there's value in coming up with the estimates, not because of the estimate itself, but it helps the team have the discussions that are necessary for you guys to unlock what this feature is or isn't and get to clarity and consistency on what we're actually being built. What the estimate is, what the size is, doesn't matter. The estimate's just a tool for you to get to a spot. As he talked about, most people, when they estimated their productivity, weren't even within their quartile. So they weren't even with their 25% range of what they actually were. So as he said, people telling you, estimating how their productivity was affected by AI is effectively a coin flip. Half the time they're right, half the time they're wrong.
For productivity cases, you can measure it to kind of see how happy they are using AI or whatever, I suppose. Great, so now let's dive into our...
He was very reluctant with that last bit around, I suppose you could. So let's go back and listen to this as he talks about using a survey to measure how happy you are. He throws it in like, I suppose. Like he felt like he was obligated to say that, but you can tell that the scientist within him didn't want to really admit that, but he just did.
For productivity cases, you can measure it to kind of see how happy they are using AI or whatever, I suppose. Great, so now let's dive into our methodology. So in an ideal world, you would have an engineer who writes code, and this code is evaluated by a panel of 10 or 15 experts who separately, without knowing what every person is answering, evaluates that code based on quality, maintainability, output, how long would this take me, how good is it, right? So kind of like a bucket of questions. And then what happens is that you aggregate those results, and we found two things. The first one is that this panel actually agrees with one another. So it turns out that one engineering expert agrees with the other engineering expert when they're talking about an objective code in front of them. And secondly, and probably most importantly, is that you can use this to predict reality. And reality is predicted by a panel like this.
So this is a reason why I believe the quality of AI code generation is going to improve, because he just talked about how they were able to consistently have experts evaluate the quality of code. So they were able to consistently say, this is what good quality code looks like. And he'll talk about in a minute here how they put that into a model. So they were able to model that. So that increased quality is coming because, as Stanford has proven here, it's 15 people, right? So again, grain of salt with what we expect to come out of this, but this is an indicator that we're going to be able to make it better. I still, just as he does, I still don't see a world where human developers aren't needed. I just don't see a world where that happens. And I, hope I'm not wrong there, but we'll find out.
The problem then is that this is very slow, it's not scalable, it's expensive. And so what we did is we built a model that essentially automates this, correlates pretty well, it's fast, it's scalable, and it's affordable. The way it works is it plugs into Git, and then the model analyzes the source code changes of every commit and quantifies them based on a bunch of these dimensions. And then, since every commit has a unique author, a unique SHA, a unique timestamp, then you can kind of understand that, okay, the productivity of a team is basically the functionality of the code they delivered across time. Not the lines of code, not the whatever commits, but like what that code is doing, right? And so then you can kind of put this in a dashboard and overlay it across time and get something similar to this. Great, so now let's dive into some of our results.
What everybody's been waiting for.
So here in September is when this company implemented AI. This is a team of about 120 developers, And they were piloting whether they wanted to use AI in their kind of regular workflow. And we have here these bars, and every bar is the sum total of the output done in that month using our methodology, not lines of code. And we can see that in green, it's added functionality. In gray, it's removed. In blue is refactoring, and in orange is reworked. And so rework versus refactoring, they both alter existing code, but rework alters code that's much more recent, meaning it's wasteful. Refactoring could be wasteful, could be not wasteful. And so from the get-go, you see that by implementing AI, you get a bunch more of rework. What happens is that you feel like you're delivering more code because there's just like more volume of code being written, more commits, more stuff being pushed. But not all of that is actually useful.
This dude just nailed it. Without a doubt, a team's capability to generate more lines of code goes massively up. But we all know more lines of code doesn't mean the product is better. Oftentimes it makes the product worse. How many teams, how many senior engineers, architects, or whatever have you worked with where they've talked about how they value removal of lines of code versus addition of lines of code? AI makes that worse. And this is hardcore data that shows you there is this orange he labeled as wasteful work. So they are reworking things. So there's a massive jump in the rework that is needed. Now, the green is also the added value. The added value does go up here. He doesn't talk about that as much as I would like him to, but overall, those green bars are bigger. So it's easy to see that, yes, AI helps you create more value, but also it requires you to do more cleanup. I mean, I think those of you that have been using AI effectively, you kind of feel that. Like, yeah, there's times where I can get some more done, but also there's some times where I feel like I'm just spinning my wheels and I'm redoing stuff that I shouldn't have to redo, and it's annoying. You start to question, should I be doing this? Should I be using AI? Oh, this is harder than it needs to be. So here's some data that's confirming that.
To be clear, I think based on this chart and overall, there is a productivity boost of about 15 to 20%. But then a lot of the gains you're seeing are basically this kind of rework, which is a bit misleading. So if I could summarize it into one chart with many discrepancies, it would be something like this. So with AI coding, you generate or you increase your productivity by roughly 30, 40%. Right? You're delivering more code. However, you got to go back and kind of fix some of the bugs that code introduced and kind of fix the mess that the AI made, which in turn gives you an average productivity gain across all industries, all sectors, everything, of roughly about 15 to 20%. There's a lot of nuance here, which...
Okay. Still, all the noise, everything that goes out there, here's data backed by hundreds of thousands of developers. That's a year old. So this is through August of 2024. And we know it's gotten better. So using the technology from a year ago, they tracked over 600 companies, over 100,000 developers, and found that on average, they were 15 to 20% more effective. Yes, there's some noise. There's some other things in there, but this is hardcore data that says you're going to be 15 to 20% more effective using AI. That's not so bad. That's pretty good. Is it game changing, life altering? No, but 20% gain is pretty darn good.
We're going to see in just a second. So here we have two violin charts, and
by the way, did anybody know before he said this that this was a violin chart? When I watched this yesterday, I had to rewind it. Like, what did he just call that? I had no idea, that there was such a thing called a violin chart. And if you asked me to draw a violin chart, never would have known it looked like this. Kind of makes sense, I guess. But hopefully you guys are smarter than me. So you guys knew what that was, right? It was news to me.
And they plot the distributions of the gains in productivity from using AI. And so kind of like the y-axis is the gains. It starts from minus 20%, take note, and then it goes up. And here we have kind of 4 pieces of data being shown. In blue is low complexity tasks, and in red is high complexity tasks. And kind of like your left, the chart to the left is greenfield tasks, the chart to the right is brownfield tasks. So right from the get-go, the first conclusion we have is that, sure, it seems like AI performs better in coding with simpler tasks. That's good, it's proven by data, that's awesome. The second thing we see is that, hey, it sounds like for low complexity greenfield tasks, there is a much more elongated distribution and a much higher distribution on average. Keep in mind that this is for enterprise settings. This doesn't apply for kind of like personal projects or vibe coding something for yourself from scratch. The improvements there would be much bigger. This is kind of for like real world working company settings. And the third thing we see is that if you look at the high complexity tasks, I mean, they're lower than the low complexity ones on average in terms of the distribution, but also in some cases, they are more likely to decrease an engineer's productivity. Now, this decrease could be for many things, many reasons, but that's kind of what we see in the data, right? The underlying causes are still not.
Also, a key point that he talked about earlier that he'll hit a little bit here, but most of us don't work in a greenfield world. Most of us work in some enterprise software setting where the product has been around for quite a while. So that means we need to, yes, the chart on the left is nice, interesting, but that only holds true for the first month. If you have a team building a greenfield app, how long is it greenfield before you have enough momentum that now it's brownfield and it's big enough? And that comes up later. He has charts and plots over certain number of lines of code.
Not super clear to us. If we translate this to a chart like this, which is a bit more digestible, you have in the bars and the columns, kind of like the average or the median gain, and then the line represents the interquartile range. So the bottom of the line is the 25th percentile, and the top of the line is roughly 75th percentile. And so here it's very clear to see how we have more gains from low complexity tasks, less gains from high complexity tasks, and then brownfield, it's harder to leverage AI to make increases in productivity there compared to greenfield.
So the point this drives home for me is something that we've been trying to do forever. Regardless of AI, we've always known, we've felt it, we've seen it, we've lived it, where if you can break your work down into smaller, digestible chunks, it's easier for you to do that work. We've known it, we've lived it. AI just highlights that and really shoved it in your face of, you know what? Teams that are good at product, teams that are good at breaking down stories, breaking them into smaller, consumable, self-contained work, you're going to be more effective. Whether it's you doing the work, a third party you're handing it off to, or AI, those same patterns and practices still hold true. If you want to be a great development team, be great at product, be great at breaking work down before you start at it. That hasn't changed. It clearly won't change.
So if there is maybe a slide that you could show to your leadership team, it could be this one, or it could also be this one. So here we have a matrix, really simplifying things. Reality is a bit more difficult than this, but here we have kind of on one axis, task complexity, low and high. On the other one, project maturity, greenfield versus brownfield. Kind of we see that, hey, low complexity, greenfield, 30 to 40% gains, right, from AI. High complexity, but greenfield, more modest gains, 10 to 15. Brownfield and low complexity, pretty good, 15 to 20%. And most importantly, high complexity brownfield tasks, 0 to 10%. These are orientative guidelines based on what we see in the data. And I forgot to mention, this slide has a sample size of 136 teams across 27 companies, so pretty representative. And then that's kind of derived, or this chart is derived from that data. Then here we have a similar matrix, except at the bottom we have language popularity. So in low, we have examples such as COBOL, Haskell, Elixir, really kind of obscure stuff. And high is things like Python, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript. And what we see is that AI doesn't really help even with low complexity tasks for low popularity languages. It can help a bit, but it's not terribly useful. And what ends up happening is that people just don't use it because if it's only helpful 2 times out of 5, you're just not going to use it very often. What's funny or interesting is that for low language popularity and complex tasks, AI can actually decrease productivity because it's so bad at coding in COBOL or Haskell or Elixir that it just makes you slower, right? Granted, this isn't very, this happens, but it may be 5 or 10% of the kind of global development work, if that, right? Most of the development work is probably somewhere in the high language popularity kind of part of the chart. And here you have gains between 20% for the low complexity and 10 to 15% for the high complexity.
I mean, this is no different than if you go to Stack Overflow or you do any research. You're going to be more effective finding answers at the more common, widely used tools. Not shocking. It's, again, those of you that have operated in some of those less popular tools, it's harder to get help. So this, it's the same thing. It translates just as you would expect.
So now moving into something a bit more theoretical, less empirically proven, but more so kind of like what we're seeing in the data, right? This is like an illustrative chart, which has kind of productivity gain from AI on the y-axis and a logarithmic scale of the code base size, right, from 1,000 lines of code to 10 million on the x-axis. And we see that as the code base size increases, the gains you get from AI decrease sharply, right? And I think most code bases nowadays are kind of somewhere in the, depending on your use case, right? But they're.
Let's take a look here real quick. Let's look at my product that I've been working on here. We've got, is there an easy way to see lines of code? Let's give this a shot. All right, so I'm at 65,000 lines of code. Is that pulling in? That's ignoring. Yeah, okay. So I'm at 65,000 lines of code. So I'm right here. I've been working on this app for like 2 weeks. And I'm at 60K lines of code. That seems like a lot. Ugh, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But it doesn't take very long to get to this massive dip. It doesn't take very long for your product to quickly reduce the value that AI provides. Yes, you get up here 60%. It's increasing your productivity by 60%. But then it drops pretty quickly because it's not going to take you long, especially using AI to get to 50, 60,000 lines of code and then around 100,000 lines of code. It's not going to take you very long because your productivity is so much faster at churning out that boilerplate starter code that just has to happen.
You're bigger than 1,000 lines of code unless you are a YC startup or something that's like kind of spun out a couple months ago, right? And that's because, there's three reasons for this really. Context window limitations. We're going to see in a second how performance decreases even with larger context windows. The signal to noise ratio kind of confuses the model, if you will. And then of course, larger code bases have more dependencies and more domain specific logic present. And so then borrowing work from this paper called Nolima, which shows you on a scale of 0 to 100 how LLMs perform on coding tasks, you see that as context length increases from 1,000 to 32,000 tokens, performance decreases. And so we see all these models here. For example, Gemini 1.5 Pro has a context window of 2 million tokens. And you might think, whoa, I can just throw my entire code base into it and it's going to retrieve and code perfectly, right? And what we see is that even at 32,000 tokens, it's already showing a decrease in performance from 90% to about 50%, right? So what's going to happen when you move from 32 to 64 or 128, right? You're going to see.
This was a big mental unlock for me when I watched this. Yes, the context windows that they offer are massive, but as you see, it doesn't take very long before the capability of the model. Yes, the context window is bigger, but that doesn't mean it can be effective with it. So sure, it can accept more context, but it still struggles to use that context effectively. Just because it has more, again, just like we talked about, more lines of code doesn't mean more better. More context clearly doesn't mean that it's more effective. It can handle more, but it quickly drops off at how effective it can be just with like 1/10 of the overall context window that it has. So be thoughtful about that when you're building your products, when you're doing your context engineering, prompt engineering, whatever you want to call it. Be thoughtful that even though the total possible context window might be huge, still fight really hard to keep the actual context you're asking the LLM to use, fight to keep that small. That will increase the likelihood of success.
Really, really poor performance here. And so in short, AI does increase developer productivity. You should use AI for most cases, but it doesn't increase the productivity of developers all the time and equally. It depends on things like task complexity, code base maturity, language popularity, code base size, and also context length. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about our research, you can access our research portal, which is softwareengineeringproductivity.stanford.edu. You can also reach me.
All right, so overall, that is a much more effective study than the one that came out a week or so ago that was only covering 16 developers. Even some of the smaller data sizes that they had were like 136 teams across 27 companies. So massively more data to validate their assumptions. Some really good data in there. So number one, thank you, Stanford, for doing that work. That is exciting to see, validating some of those thoughts and theories and some interesting points. So glad we covered that. Now it's time for me to write some code using AI, because that's the other thing we do here. All right. So we are picking up Road Trip Ninja again. We are going to, the big effort for us today is, this is the primary screen that people land on. So this is the thing that they see first. They see a list of locations. They come in here, and this is not useful at all. So I built out a handful of stories with AI support to write those issues in GitHub. So we're going to be knocking some of those out. And what you'll see is I did my darndest to make them as small as possible. So let's see. So let's look at improved list item display. So we have these 7 items that we broke out, trying to be as, again, thinking about keeping your context window as small as possible. Forget the max size that the context window that your model supports. Forget that. You're going to be more effective if you keep the active window of context that you're asking your model to use, keep that as small as possible. So sure, they're going to publish numbers, 2 million tokens, 3 million tokens, whatever, that number is going to go up and up. That really doesn't matter. What matters is it's got to get better at using the context. So that's your job. That's your job as the product leader here, whatever title you want to use for that. That's your job. All right, so we are going to add distance context to the location list. So we're going to work on number 83 here. So let's get Claude ready to rock and roll. Okay. I would like to work on What's up there? Welcome, fellow AI enjoyer. You know, you know what I enjoy? I enjoy building software products. I like it and I like streaming. So it's a good combo platter. There's some people that like woodworking or painting or mowing the lawn, whatever it is. This is the thing that I enjoy the most. So I just decided, hey, we'll build products in the wild. You know what I haven't done that I should have done? I'm going to make this a lot bigger for everybody else to see. I feel like I've done a poor job as a streamer providing useful. Okay. I'm going to work on GitHub issue number 83. Read through that issue and build a plan that aligns with Claude.md. Think hard. Plan mode. Okay. So the reason why I'm comfortable using such a short prompt is because we spent a fair amount of time building out the actual issue that is fueling all of this. So we talk about current behavior, desired behavior, notes of how it should work, various things that we should point to. So that if we go to these other items, here's some of the newer ones. So 102 will be the next one. Again, what the problem is, what the solution is, what it looks like, our logic. So building out this works really well. Yeah, I agree with you. So I do most of my work in TypeScript or JavaScript, and if you would have talked to Josh at the turn of the century, when I was in the .com world and the bubble, everything that went into that, I hated JavaScript. I hated JavaScript because it made everything accessible. And as an enterprise developer, I ended up having to support a lot of things that were written in JavaScript that were shoved into an enterprise environment and made my life very difficult. So AI has that same capability where it opens the door and allows everybody to come in and create products, which is great. But you have to understand that those products shouldn't necessarily get shoved into an enterprise environment. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to figure out what that threshold is of what's appropriate for enterprise development. What's the right way to use AI to make that happen? What happens when your project gets to be 50,000 lines of code, 100,000 lines of code? So those are the things I'm trying to figure it out. Yeah, man. I tell you what, the amount I've learned from YouTube has just been amazing. Okay, let's look at what we have going on here. Yep, we know that. We know that. Whoa. Locationless component. Optional. Okay, when you use your location is. Okay. All right, so one of the things that you'll see is that there are things that Claude wants to do that Claude is thinking through. Okay, we should do this. We should do this. But what I made sure that when we created these issues and grouped them together, that we're very clear that this issue is just about this. Yes, there's other things you're going to want to do, but we actually have other issues that are going to tackle that later. So we built effectively a stack set of issues that say we're doing this now, we're not doing this because we're doing that later. So that's why you see things about, hey, we could do this, but it's solved in a later issue. Again, we're trying to keep the context window that we're asking Claude to work with as narrow and tight as possible. Okay. This all looks good. All right, Claude. Go. Make it happen, my friend. Man, number one, kudos to you for typing nonchalantly. I'm not sure I would even attempt that. Make sure we're on the right branch. I'm worried we're not. Okay. We are on the right spot. Okay. Yeah. Job well done. Yeah. And that, I think that's the biggest hurdle. And that's what I'm trying to figure out by building this product, is really understanding where that breaking point is with vibe coding versus building an enterprise product. Cause I've spent my whole career in the enterprise space. So this is where I'm trying to figure all of that out. Fred from Spain. Welcome, my friend. Sports science. That's exciting. Yeah. I'm a sports guy too. I played football in college. I bet you played football. No, rugby. That's tough guy stuff. Good for you. I prefer protection. You guys are much tougher than us. Yeah. So, Fred, let me give you a bit of a rundown of how I tackle things. I do a lot of work up front to define the work. There's a PRDs are the big thing in the space. You see a lot of folks writing code, writing tools that help you build PRDs, product requirements. I put everything in GitHub issues, and that's my requirements. So what I try and do, which you can see, is I have a whole list of work items that I've created that detail out the things that I want to do. Now, what I do is I make sure that I get help from AI to write all of this out, because it does a fantastic job, especially when you make sure that you tell it. Make sure when you're creating those issues that you add in the context that would be valuable for you later when we decide to come back and work on this feature a week from now or whatever. So it does a good job of pulling everything together to get that in a good spot. Okay, what do we have going on? All right. So, okay. All right, Claude. Let's calm down. Let's chill with saying it was successfully completed. You checked some boxes. You did some things. I appreciate that. But I'm still gonna do some testing here. So just relax. Chill your bones. All right. So I'm gonna. It said it did everything. I said it did all of the gate checks. So ran prettier, did lint, did the type check, production build. It says you didn't run the tests. Should we have created tests? Come on, Claude. npm run test. All right, so the test passed, and we altered tests, but we added a new method. Double check here. We added a method in, oops, can't type. Method into utils.ts, but no test was added to support that. Check with Claude.md to validate if we should have a test, And if so, add it. Also, another thing I've invested pretty heavily. Let me open VS Code here for you. I've invested pretty heavily in markdown files that document everything we're doing. So if we go in here, we have the Claude markdown file, which gives you the basics of everything that we're doing. But then there's child markdown files that detail out for those specific items. This is how we make that happen. So in testing markdown, we cover a lot about what we do test, what we don't test, and all those various things. Surprise, surprise. I asked Claude to help me write these. Actually, what happened was I created a massive Claude markdown, and it started complaining that context was getting too big. So I said, okay, cool. Well, then help me break it down into child markdown files, and this is the place that we landed. So it does a pretty good bit here. Okay. Should definitely add a test. Okay. Right. So there's rules in testing markdown file that if it's our own custom logic, so we don't test third-party tools. We assume those are tested. We don't need to test those again. Those are all good. So if there's any business logic that we have within our system, those are the things that we test. So this one falls directly into that. So we will let it create that. Okay, we're going to let you go. Okay, cool. I'm going to check all the things. So those tests are still running. npm run format because I'm crazy. npm run lint. npm run type check. And we know tests are running, so we're going to npm run dev. And we're going to look at this. That's production, so we need to go. All right, so this is a cluster of 3 items. We got to fix this. There's an issue coming up to fix that. But this one is not a cluster, so this one is 8.7 miles away from my house. So cool. Looks like we did a thing. Not bad, not bad. We should probably add that same. We're not going to do this. Got to keep the context window small. So this is where you got to be careful with yourself of like, oh man, well, we're showing the distance in the list. We should probably show it in the location page, but that's going to expand the scope of what we're trying to do. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to say, all right, this all looks good. I would like you to create a branch for this work. Jeez, I can't type this work, and also PR so we can get reviews on the changes. I also would like, no, one thing at a time, one thing at a time, one thing at a time. I'll come back. What I want to do is I want to create an issue that updates the actual location page with the distance in the same way. So, but we'll stay focused. Context window, small. So now what's going to happen? It's going to create a branch, push that up to GitHub, create a PR. That's going to kick off code reviews from Claude's going to do a review of its code, and it's going to tell you it made some great code. It always does. GitHub Copilot is going to do a review, and CodeRabbit, which is a third-party tool that I'm paying for, is going to do that. So that gives me a whole team looking at the code. Plus, I walk through the code myself just to be mentally comfortable and say, like, yeah, this all makes sense. So this is the PR. Yep, create. Okay, cool. Fred, what looks like Freddie. We're going to go with Fred. So you said Fred. You said, hey, Josh, here's Fred from Spain. But in your YouTube name, it says Frederick. And then in parentheses, it says Freddie. So you got to tell me which version of Fred I should be talking to. Is it Fred, Freddie, or Frederick? You pick. You let me know, and I'll go with it. I don't clean or compact until it forces me to. So it compacts the conversation on its own. I have not been vigilant at that or forced that. I've seen people that have talked about that being a thing that you should do, but maybe that's the thing I should try, is like after each issue, I get that done, I start fresh again. That's probably a good idea. We're going to give that a shot. I'm excited. Good idea. You got to tell me which version of your name to use too, buddy. Okay, so now we can go back here, pull requests, and we'll see all the PRs. Everything's running. Copilot claims it's done already. Woo. Okay. CodeRabbit also, I kind of like CodeRabbit. Actually, I really like CodeRabbit. CodeRabbit does its own summary. So Claude Code, as we saw, creates a full summary of everything that it did. But CodeRabbit comes in and it's like, hey, that's cool, Claude Code. I'm doing my own. I don't care what you said. I'm going to go look at all the changes. I'm going to give you a summary. Okay, so here's Claude's review. All right, Fred or Freddie. Well, you said Fred in the first comment, so I'm sticking with Fred. You are forever etched in my brain as Fred. Ooh, look at this. Unnecessary recalculations. All right, so here's how I handle this process. Is what I'll do is I'll be asking, CodeRabbit really came back with nothing? Interesting. So what I like to do is I'll just do it right here with you guys here. There's no reason for me to say what I'm going to do when I'm doing it. Okay. I would like you to review all of the PR comments and can't type tonight, and build a plan for how we should respond to each. Claude Code caught some good performance issues, so we need to address those. Use context 7 for documentation support, and make sure any plan you create aligns with Claude.md. Think hard on this plan. Okay, so we've got some performance issues, which all makes sense. It's calculating it twice, so we're going to fix that. And this input validation shouldn't be an issue, but it's probably worth putting that in there. All right, so here you go. It's compacting by itself. Yeah, so we got to let it do its thing. Yeah, Fred, have you run into that being an issue with you where if you don't compact on the regular, stuff gets worse? I've just been letting it manage it itself. I've not been attempting to manage it for it. So I don't know whether that's been a thing that's made things harder and I didn't know it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I've not seen that, but I'm going to try it now. All right, so let's see what Claude comes back with. Let me do this. Yep. Implement use memo caching to ensure. Yep. That's good. Okay, so you're saying that you've seen when it compacts, you end up with interesting results. This, I have not paid enough attention to how it's behaved before and after compaction. So that's something that I'll start paying attention to now that you've asked me that question. I'll have to figure out if that's a thing or not. But what I will do is we'll do a clear with each one. Yeah, so context 7 is an MCP that provides access to documentation for, I think, 7,000 different tools. I have issues with MCP staying connected. That has been the biggest issue that I've had, is that I have to exit Claude and then restart Claude, and it reconnects. But I'm a fan of, there's good documentation out there. So let's make sure that when you're going to go build a thing using Next.js or Drizzle or Postgres or whatever, that we consult the documentation on what the best practices are. So that's what I use Context 7 for. When it works, it's great. But for some reason, Claude does not like to maintain the connection to it. So we'll look at that in a minute here. I will show you what I'm talking about as it freaks out. You're up late over there in Spain, my friend. Was that plus 5 hours over there? It's got to be close to midnight. Yeah, so the magic words are use context 7. Let's take a look at that. Well, this is doing this thing. Yeah, so it's got the latest documentation for whatever tool you're using. So like I use Shed CNUI. So it gives it LLM formatted context that it can work with. Okay. Claude did its thing. We have those changes. I probably need to push them in. Yep. Okay, so we'll get all that pushed up into GitHub, and we'll get the PR running again. So this will have us. All right, code is pushed up. So yeah, so we have these feedback fixes up, which is we need to tell Copilot to do its thing. CodeRabbit will do its thing by itself. Claude will do its thing by itself. So it'll be good. Your question about TypeScript errors. One of the things that where would that be? Thank you for the follow. Visual effects. So I'm very crazy about keeping types tight. So we always run prettier and lint, and we don't allow disabled lint rules. And then we run type check before we're done with everything, so the types are always locked and loaded. That's just, I found that's one of those things where you have to stay on top of it. Yeah. So code quality, it's gonna lint, it will fix, it will do the format check. We have a pre-commit hook that runs, make sure that we are linting, make sure that prettier runs, checks all the unit tests. So we have various gates that are in place that validate that everything's good before we say thumbs up to everything. Okay. All right. Claude is happy with everything. We addressed the issues. One minor suggestion. I'm not going to worry about that. So that's all good. Copilot. I don't know if I'll worry about that. I'm not worried about that. Okay, so I'm good with this. So we're going to merge it. We'll be done. All right, so we now have 1 of 7 done. Okay. So we go back. We'll do one more. So we go back to our issues, milestones, improve list item display. So the next one is display amenity icons in location list component. So I'm going to follow Fred's advice. We are going to /clear. All right. Hey, take care. Thanks for dropping in, Fred. Happy to have you here. Hope I helped. If I did, subscribe, do all that stuff, so you'll see when I'm live. Also on YouTube Shorts, I post a lot of stuff. So even if you can't make it because of the time difference, you can always catch up there. So thanks for hanging out. Take care of yourself and sleep well, my friend. Okay. So on to the next one. So we are going to work on amenity icons. So item 102, we have this defined of what we want to do. We know we have the amenity data, so we'll get that. We have logic around what we want to show, what's most impactful for parents. Take care, Fred, /Freddy, /Frederick. We got a plan, so we're good. Okay. So that is, let me make sure I get the 102. Let's work on on issue number 102. Build a plan for how we can address this need. Wait, let me check and make sure if we're connected to context 7. Context 7 failed. Why? I don't understand. But then look, we do this and we go /MCP and context 7 is working. That's great. Wonderful. I love when a reboot does the thing. It's the worst. Want to address issue number 102. Build a plan for how we can implement this. Use context 7 for documentation reference for our tools. Make sure the plan aligns with Claude.md. Think hard on this one. Yes, that actually does make a difference. Telling it to think hard or think harder or ultra think actually does a thing. Okay. So Claude's going to go off, figure that out. Again, we can have a really shallow prompt for this because we invested heavily in the GitHub issue and having that locked and loaded and defined. So we're in a good spot where we've done the work up front. So now the effort to get the prompt going and get Claude doing its thing can be lessened. Using context 7. Yeah, I love it. Too bad we had to reboot Claude to make that happen. I'm going to figure out why it does that. Because context 7 is great when it works. And I'm not blaming context 7. Maybe I should blame context 7. Maybe that's the problem. All right, what do we got here? You got a lot going on here, buddy. Good plan, good plan. Be interesting to see how it solves this priority ordering for amenities. A little worried about that being less than optimal, but we'll figure that out. Okay, I feel good about this. This all looks pretty good. It's not creating new tests. We're going to come back after this and have it create tests. What I don't want to do, what I have this inclination to do is, oh, well, let's add additional context into this request. This request looks good. So I need to let it do its thing. I'll manage the additional context of what's next. I'll keep it in my head of, okay, we're going to come back. The tests aren't there. That's fine, but this is good. So we're going to let this do its thing. We'll come back and we'll add the context of now we need to make sure the tests are there. But I found that when I try and just continue to layer additional context on top, Claude starts to lose a little bit. So just you have to be the one to maintain that. Okay. So let me go back here and see how I'm implementing. What's the best way to optimal approach? I don't know which one to do. So the remote server isn't working really well. See, so you don't really need the GitHub MCP server because it has a GitHub app built into it, so you don't really need that. Sequential thinking is the one I've been thinking about using. Interesting. Okay. Claude is progressing. I'm not thrilled about how it's choosing to do this query. So I'm doing a little bit of a review as it's creating the code. I'll bring this in the window here so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just watching it as it's creating the code. What I don't like, what I'm not a fan of, is I like my queries to just query one thing. This is doing a lot of juggling, managing business logic. So I'm going to challenge Claude Code to fix that. We have a service layer that can do some of this. So I'm going to challenge it to fix that. The code, and I don't like how much logic we have baked into the, what is that? Location queries with, we should be able to just join on location amenities and return the data. We have display logic in our queries. When we have it filter out the top 5, etc. That is a UI issue, or likely a service level issue, and should not be managed in the query. We should keep our queries as simple as possible and only focus on getting data in or out of the DB. This should be defined in our Claude.md files. Build a plan to simplify the query and push business logic into the service layer, and update the Claude.md files if this wasn't clearly defined in them before. Think harder on this. Yeah, so this is one of those things where it's achieving the goal, but it's slightly misaligned with architectural guidelines that I know are effective, that I know are scalable and maintainable. So you always have to keep an eye out for the work that it's doing, because what will happen is it will get off base a little bit, and it will replicate this approach in other places because it's seen, oh, this is okay. So you have to be the one to remind it, no, that's not how we want to do that. And part of it could be my fault. Maybe my markdown files weren't clear enough on what my expectations were for what lives in a query file versus what lives in a service file. So that's why I said, hey, let's look at the markdown files. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. If I wasn't, okay, cool. Let's make it clear so that from now on, we don't have this problem. Much better, much better, much better. Okay, what do we have here? like this. I like this plan. This is good. We did it. My friends, this is why you keep an eye on Claude. It was trying to do the right thing. The markdown files I had defined were a little bit loose. It gave it a little bit of wiggle room and it took advantage of it. If I wasn't looking at the code, we start to diverge a little bit, and that divergence begins to grow over time. So you have to remain vigilant. This is the same thing with those PRs that come in from your teammates. You have to take the time to really focus in and make sure that you're doing things the right way. That's why I'm maniacal about prettier and lint and not disabling rules. Those are just things that we do. And if there's any reason, if there's some weird example where we need to disable a rule, we document the heck out of it, because it should be a one-off. It should not be the norm. Yeah, why are we sorting? Why are we not sorting using the database? Come on, Claude. You're better than this, buddy. All right, we're going to do this. This will be the last one we wrap up. We've got a little bit more to do here. We can knock this out. We will have added 2 good features for our users into the product. That's not bad. Pretty good progress. So tonight's work has been better because I've focused more than ever on keeping the working context window as small as possible. There have been multiple times where we're working on something, I recognize, ooh, I want to add this on. I've had to fight really hard to not allow myself to add that on, create an issue that we're going to work on in the future. But let's stay focused. Let's do what we came here to do. Let's do that. If there's additional work that we need to do, that's another work item. That's the same thing you do with your teams. All that stuff applies. It's just easier for you to type it in and like, oh, let's do this. So you have to be careful to not allow yourself to do that. Yeah, I don't like how we're doing sorting not in the database. We should be able to join. We should be able to tackle this with one query. We should be able to join on amenities. We'll fix that. No big deal. Our query can be optimized even further. We should be able to have one query instead of two and use joins to manage all of that. Also, we should be sorting amenities in the DB and not in the TypeScript. The TypeScript method. Use context 7 to make sure we are leveraging our tools properly, and make sure your plan aligns with Claude.md. Think hard on this. Okay, this all looks pretty good. And again, this is something that we have to, there's some times when, okay, we don't really need to hyper optimize that query because it's not going to get called that many times. This query is getting called all the time because this is a core piece of functionality of what our product does. It's going to return you the locations that you want to see, and it's going to return the amenities that are a part of that location that are important. So if we can reduce that from 2 queries to 1, and we rely on the database performance to manage all that, we're going to be way more efficient. We're going to be way more scalable, and maintainability is going to go up. So that's why this is one of those times where, like, okay, we got to get this right. We got to make sure that we're efficient and effective with how we're building this. This is why I've spent an extra 30 minutes working through to make sure we get this query right, because it's going to run all the freaking time. Okay. Okay. This looks much better. Cool. So that's one of those things where that's a difference between vibe coding and enterprise coding, is looking at that query, understanding it's going to get run hundreds, thousands of times every hour and optimizing it to make sure that we're making that query once, we're putting the sorting where it's most effective, most efficient in the database. So if you're just building a POC, stuff like that doesn't matter. But if you're building a thing that you're expecting to scale and not fall over once you get some real usage, these are the things you have to pay attention to. And now we're compacting. Okay, we're off and running. All right, so we'll have made the changes. We're going to look at the changes here in a minute when it's done freaking out. It does that when it runs all these things together. Good job, Lint. That's what I like to see. Clean up those little things. Okay, so our query. Whoa, 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 whoa. Relax there, buddy. All right, that's one query. It's a little bit messier, but that's much better. Just doing all the work to build into a JSON object. But that's okay. Let's do the work on the server and the database. Let that do its thing. Okay, cool. I'm going to test this thing out here. I just want to see. So we go back home. We get no locations. So what's it not doing there? Can't type. Any plan we build should align with Claude.md. So this happened because we didn't update the test, I bet. I bet if we had updated the test, which I knew it wasn't updating the test, but I wanted to try and keep the scope and context with which it was working as narrow and tight as possible. So I think this is the issue here. Wonder why we're looking back at this little concerning here. Why are we looking at the package.json? That's not the problem. The changes we made are the problem. Relax. All right, I'm going to run the test. See if the test fails. Yeah, we get failed tests. Relax. I don't want to do that yet. Yeah, that was one of those moments where I almost... Okay. All right, this all seems pretty good. Okay. I'm going to shut down the stream. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I thank you for hanging out on the stream. We had some good chats. Folks from Spain checking in, asking questions. A couple new follows. It's been good. Appreciate you all